Hello everybody, my name's Ben and this is my May reading wrap-up. Yes, this month I read 8 books and yes, we're going to talk about them. Well, at least I want to talk about them. So the first 3 books I read was His Dark Materials, and I did actually do a big old long 30-minute video about rereading these books again. So if you want to have a look at that, then please do. I shall link it down below or up wherever it is. Do I have anything else to say about them? Well, so I was, at the beginning of the month, I was going to be reading Wives and Daughters by Elizabeth Gaskell, but I can be a bit of an idiot a lot of the time, especially at the gym, and I was a bit of an idiot at the gym and I threw my back out at the gym, which wasn't a good idea. And yes, I was kind of like in pain and kind of hunched over like this. And I was like, I don't want to read Wives and Daughters. So instead, I read His Dark Material. So it was very much an impulse read. So yeah, so if you want to see my sort of my glasses keep slipping. If you want to see my full sort of thoughts about each of these, then do watch that other video. Do I have any kind of bullet points to make? If I do, then here are the sort of bullet points of how I felt. Yes, I'm a bit wary about reading the new trilogy, the Book of Dust trilogy. Is it worth it? A couple of people have said that it is worth it. I've sort of been swayed by certain people that there's a couple of things in them which I'm like, don't really know if I like the sound of that. Kind of like sort of like in a sort of yikes context. So I don't know whether I'm going to read them or not. My sister has let me borrow this very short story, which is kind of, just like a kind of one-off little thing. Lyra's Oxford. Yeah, so I've got that to read. But yeah, should I read the Book of Dust trilogy? There's the question. Okay, so next up. So from kind of fantasy adventure series to a mythological retelling book. So I read The Perfect Nine by Ngugi wa Thiong'o. Is it wa Thiong'o or is it wa Thiong'o? I should have looked that up before I started speaking. Right, so this author, I'm pretty sure, speaking of my sister, I'm pretty sure my sister and I went to see him give a talk at the British Library like over a decade ago. Yeah, I think we saw him speak, and after that I bought Wizard of the Crow, but I sort of like started it, but I never finished it. So I really need to read that and a lot of his other work, obviously, because he's a very important author. And this is his latest book, and this, The Perfect Nine, and this book was longlisted for the International Booker 2020. It didn't make the shortlist, but it did. It was longlisted. So this is sort of an interesting one to describe. It's a novel in verse, and it is a sort of a retelling of the creation story from Kikuyu mythology. Okay, so the Perfect Nine is a group of, 9 daughters, as well as a 10th, which makes it the Perfect Nine. And about 100 men, or was it 99 men, come along to woo them. And so these daughters, they're given the option to choose which of these men they're going to marry and start big clans with. And in order to kind of to help them choose, they all go on this massive quest to find a cure for the 10th daughter who can't walk. And there's this cure kind of, miles and miles away. And yes, it's like a perilous journey, and so and the men kind of one by one either sort of give up or they get killed off. Eventually, there's a small number of men which the daughters all pick from. Now, I say it's like a mythological retelling, and when I say that with a kind of like a because this isn't Circe, this isn't like Silence of the Girls or anything like that, Thousand Ships. This is very much from a Kenyan lens. It's not so much about, well, it is about the story, but a lot of it is about the language and the kind of the form of it. So he wrote this originally in Gikuyu, and it's the first novel, I think, in that language to be longlisted for the Booker. And then he translated it himself into English. And his thing now is he will write his novels first in Gikuyu before translating it into English, because he wants to kind of preserve the native language, And so that is kind of like not the point, but that's kind of more of the book's raison d'être than the sort of like a gripping sort of story. And the story is, it's interesting, but it's kind of more interesting. The story around it is more interesting, if you know what I mean. There's an Instagrammer called Bernie Lombardi, and he did a great review of this, and much more articulate to what I'm saying, so I'll link that below. But yeah, so I do really want to, because I don't think this is a good book to start with this author, so I do need to read Wizard of the Crow and maybe Grain of Wheat and the others. But yeah, it's certainly an interesting one. I can understand. I haven't read any of the other ones on the long list, but I can sort of understand why this wasn't shortlisted. But it definitely deserved to be longlisted because it is interesting. Okay, so from the International Booker to the Booker last year, so I finally read This Mournable Body Oddy Oddy by Tsitsi Dangarembga. Right, so this is the last book in a trilogy of books by Tsitsi Dangarembga, which is the Nervous Conditions trilogy. So yeah, so this was shortlisted for the Booker last year, and I was really interested in reading this book because it is in the second person, and if you know me, then you know that I'm kind of I've got a bit of a thing for second person novels because I think they're fascinating. But because this is the last of a trilogy, I was kind of aware that I did want to read the other two, and I have read the other two. So the first is Nervous Conditions, then The Book of Knots, and then this one. And yeah, it has taken me a while to get to this, but I'm glad I did. These novels, so they are centered around Tambu, or Tambudzai, who is in Zimbabwe, and it's kind of around the era of independence, although this goes up to the millennium. So in the first book, it's Tambu. She's she's working her way towards an education, and it's her trying to not be thwarted by the fact that she's a young girl, and it's only like the boys who get the decent education, and she's sort of trapped in this. This is Nervous Conditions. She's sort of trapped in this nexus of a kind of a patriarchal Shona traditional background, and then kind of like a racist Western paradigm coming the other way, but which promises a decent education. So she's sort of trapped in that sort of nexus. Then in the second book, The Book of Knots, she gets this education. She goes to this very prestigious private school with a scholarship. But because of her skin colour, because she is Zimbabwean, in a school predominantly for white Europeans, her achievements are kind of thwarted or dulled or dimmed, and are kind of like worthless. It's a grueling book, this book. And in here we have Tambu as an adult, and it's about her having, I don't know why I'm laughing, it's about her having a complete nervous breakdown. So it's pretty, so these books, I mean, I think they're an immense achievement. They're not a laugh a minute, they're not, they're not kind of fun books, they're very serious. But saying that, they are still, I think, really, really gripping and very, very powerful. And this was just amazing, I thought. I was just like... So this book picks up where Book of Knot left off, with Tambu really in a very dire situation where she's she hasn't got a job and she's looking for a place to live. She's living in a hostel, and she's pretty much right at the end of her rope. So yeah, the novel is about her trying to scramble her way back to a position that she has always expected for herself. Being an intelligent, hardworking, young woman, she has always had a dream and an expectation of where her life will go and the achievements that she will make. But when they don't happen, despite her kind of deserving them, she ends up having this kind of complete nervous breakdown. And then it's about the rebuilding after the nervous breakdown, and kind of the kind of things that she sells out in order to succeed. Yeah, so it's about identity. It's about identity as a Zimbabwean woman, trying to kind of find herself, but also find herself in a country which is struggling with its own identity as well, post-independence. So one of the big things that were spoken about last year with this being shortlisted in the Booker Prize was, can you read this as a standalone, or do you have to read the other two? And I think having read this and having read all of them, I think you can read this as a standalone. So the events of the first two books are kind of summarised. However, they are summarised very kind of briefly, and you don't really understand or appreciate the kind of the hardships of what's been going on. And so you sort of don't really appreciate kind of the backstory. And also, Tambu as a character, from the off, she's not a likable character at all. She's pretty despicable, actually. And if you haven't read the first two books, then you won't sort of appreciate or understand where her sort of character traits come from, and where her kind of snobbishness, and even kind of her flaws, where they sort of come from. So yeah, she's very jealous. She's very bitter, and she does, she's willing to kind of sell out her family and her village in order to get ahead, sort of thing. However, having read those two books and then this one, I thought this was a really, really powerful read, and a very kind of like gripping read, because it's trauma after trauma after trauma, especially in the second book. And in this one, you really get the ramifications of what trauma after trauma after trauma does to your psyche, because this is in the second person. And that's also a great thing about this book being in the second person, that it kind of really kind of, there's a kind of like a detachment which I think works really, really, really well. So yeah, it's got a fantastic climax, this book. It's got like a really like amazing climax. I had no idea where it was going to go, and it goes into a very very climactic place. And I think it is an immense achievement, and I would very much recommend it. They are not, as I say, they are not fun reads. They're not, a barrel of laughs, but I do think I think they're worth it, and I think she's done something special, I think. I'll get to my opinions about the Booker Prize winnings later on, but yes, I really, really, really like this. I thought it was excellent. This is going to go, by the way. I can't deal with it anymore. It's just got to go. Look at it. I'm like, hello. Okay, next we have sort of two very big. Well, we have two major award winners from last year. Next, so first of all, we have Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. Right, so this won the Women's Prize for Fiction last year. So this is a historical fiction book, and if you recognise the title, yes, it is about Hamnet. So what is Hamnet about? So Hamnet is William Shakespeare's son, and the book is basically about the lead up to Hamnet's death. I think he's 11, I think. So yeah, it's about the lead up to his death and then the aftermath of his death. So it's about grief, and it's about the lives of of William Shakespeare's family. I say William Shakespeare, it's not really about Shakespeare, really. It's about his wife and Hamnet's mother, Agnes. And yeah, so the book really is about Agnes and about her entering this relationship with William Shakespeare and having children, and then her relationship with her son Hamnet. And yeah, sort of like the build up to this sort of fateful day, and then the aftermath of what happens afterwards. And it is a very, very beautiful and moving and very powerful book. It did surprise me. It's not the book that I thought it was going to be, which we'll get into. But yes, I did think. Yes, I was like, a prize-winning book. Yes, I can see that. Hamnet. So what surprised me about it? Well, first of all, I mean, one of the big things last year that people said about this book was that it's really moving and sort of, beautiful and stuff. They didn't say how stressful it is. This is a stressful book, particularly like the first half. I mean, you're told. I mean, on the back, and sort of in the sort of the forward, that Hamnet dies. You're told that, so you know that from the off. And she does kind of prolong the agony, so to speak. She sort of flips between present day, where Hamnet is sort of trying to find someone to help with his sister, and you sort of flash back to when Agnes and William meet, and their kind of their initial romance and stuff, and how their families reacted to them getting together. So yeah, the fact that it was really, really stressful surprised me. Secondly, this book is a little bit woo-woo. There's a little bit of woo-woo with this. Yeah, so Agnes, she has a kind of a how do you describe this? She has kind of like a oogie bougie type of woo-woo, vaguely sort of witchy side to her. So she has this thing where she can sort of sense people's thoughts, or she can sort of sense people's backstory. She has a way of kind of connecting into people's backstory, and sort of knowing what people really are thinking and stuff. If you're wanting something that's really historically accurate, I can see you sort of might go, what? The grief section I thought was very, very well done, and and fabulous. And the strain that puts on Agnes and William's relationship, and how he is off in London, becoming a famous playwright and everything. I just thought it's just really, really well done, very, very well written, and of course, but but it's an odd one. I didn't expect a lot of the things that was going on in it. I didn't expect the woo-woo element. I didn't expect the stressful element, and but yeah, again, it's got a fabulous ending as well. I can imagine this working as a film. It's got a good sort of structure as a film. Yeah, it's just very well executed. I mean, I've never read Maggie O'Farrell's work before. She's fairly prolific, isn't she? And yeah, she knows what she's doing structurally, and she knows what she's doing in a writery sense. And that's the thing, because it is literary fiction, but it is kind of on the sort of more accessible end of literary fiction, which is sort of possibly why the Booker was like, but yeah, no, it's accessible, but it's literary, and it's moving and gripping and stressful and a bit kind of like, ooh. But yeah, I thought it was really, 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 really good. So there. Right, next. So I read the Booker winner 2020. I read Shuggie Bain, by Douglas Stuart. So yes, this won the Booker Prize last year. Right, so I had an interesting time reading this book, because I don't particularly, I'm not really a fan of this sort of like trauma porn thing. I mean, that's kind of like a phrase I don't really like, but it's sort of been said about this, and I'm sort of a bit wary of those sorts of books. And I think I was kind of like predisposed to not like this book based on what other people have said about it. So other booktubers who I sort of like and respect. yeah, some people were really, really happy that this won, and then some people were really disappointed. And I remember watching the videos of people who were disappointed and being like, "Ooh, yes, I can sort of." It sounds like I would be disappointed as well. So I was predisposed to not like this book. However, it turns out I did like it. I did well, yeah, I did like it. So this is a debut novel, and it is set in 80s Glasgow. And it focuses on Shuggie Bain, who is this young boy who has a severely alcoholic mother. Again, she's called Agnes. And yes, it's about his childhood through to adolescence, trying to look after his alcoholic mother in dire poverty circumstances, in kind of Thatcher 80s Glasgow, and yeah, the kind of the characters and people that help or hinder them along the way, and it's also about him sort of, well, yeah, it is, yeah, about him coming to terms with his sexuality. He is gay in this, well, the author says queer, but he's basically an effeminate young boy who ends up being gay. So I said trauma porn. I mean, yes, so this is very much trauma after trauma after trauma on a sort of conveyor belt, sort of generation game conveyor belt. What's awful, traumatic thing is going to happen next? So yeah, every chapter basically will either have a sexual assault, an act of violence, an alcoholism sort of disaster, fuel disaster, some bullying, something really, really bad will happen every single chapter, sort of in the first 100 pages. And I could sort of recognise that as a thing, and I was like, well, I think usually I wouldn't really like this, but I was gripped by it. I was like, oh, right, what's going to happen next? What's going to happen next? So Shuggie Bain's father, Shug, is this emotionally and physically abusive guy, and he ends up abandoning his wife and kids in a really kind of nasty way. Although there's a sentence which describes this abandonment like really like, oh wow, and this kind of makes her kind of spiral downwards even more. So as I say, I mean, the first like 200 pages are really, really gripping and like, ooh. Now this is a 400-page novel, and in the middle, there is another traumatic event, and then a new character turns up. And when this new character turns up, I was like, do I want another 200 pages of this? I was thinking I think I have the patience for another 100 pages, not 200 pages. For me, this feels like a really solid 300-page book, which has been stretched out to 400 pages, sort of. That's basically what I felt in the middle, anyway. Because it is fairly relentless, as well as having a bit of like padding. There's some events and traumatic bits which felt a bit kind of like padding a little bit, However, I stuck with it, and yes, I ended up really enjoying it. I ended up really, really enjoying it. Enjoying it. Well, I was gripped by it. That being said, I did kind of like Matthew Shirapa says, I got it, and I did get it. Sort of in the middle, sort of in the second half, I was like, okay, I sort of understand where this is going to go. I wasn't moved at the end because you know that's where the book is heading, and so it's just a case of, okay, when is it going to happen, and kind of what's the kind of the fallout going to be. So I wasn't moved, but I was. Yeah, I did think it was a really, really well done book, and I was like, ooh, at the end. So I think the other reason that I liked it is because although it is relentless kind of conveyor belt trauma, conveyor belt traumas, there are little moments peppered here and there, little acts of kindness, particularly from strangers, which I really liked. You know, I really liked that kind of, but you know, particularly kind of, you know, people in poverty-stricken circumstances, recognizing when someone needs help and sort of reaching out, even if the person who is being reached out to doesn't take the support, it's been offered, you know, and I like that a lot. Without giving anything away, I loved the final sort of chapter. You know, I really liked that. And yeah, and for the most part, I mean, it's really well written. There's a couple of clunky bits which you can sort of, well, it's a debut novel, so you can sort of understand that. But yeah, for the most part, I thought it was really well written. Is it manipulative? Well, maybe a little bit. Yeah, it didn't really sort of surprise me very much. You know, it's one of those things where, you know, you get a set of circumstances and set of characters, and based on those kind of characters and circumstances, you can kind of plot out where the book is going to go. But yeah, just the way that it's done, it's not so much a twisty-turny book, but a gripping kind of like, oh, well, how are they going to react to these sort of inevitable things that are going to happen? So yes, but I do think it is too long. I do think it is a little bit too long. Right, so it did win the Booker. I think I'm ready to draw a line under Booker 2020 now. I've read 4 of the 6 shortlisted books. So I've read Real Life, Shuggie Bain, This Mournable Body Oddy Oddy, and Burnt Sugar. I don't really have any interest in reading the other 2 now. Based on the 4 that I have read, do I agree with Shuggie Bain winning? Well, it's complicated. If it was my choice, I would probably say This Mournable Body. I think this would probably be my winner. However, it's kind of difficult. It is difficult to kind of champion this book and sort of defend this book too much because, of course, the prize is for the book. It's not for a trilogy. And so the judges, I would hope that the judges read the entire trilogy, but they weren't obliged to. And so as a standalone book, I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm just not sure whether it would have won, whether it was sort of like a non-starter for it to win. But taken in context with the other 3 books, I think this really deserves. I think this deserves all the prizes. Really, I think the trilogy deserves all the prizes, if you know what I mean, because I think it's an astounding achievement. But that's not what the Booker Prize was. It was for a single book, and so yeah, so this is what they chose. Now, because there was discussions about this kind of the people who were disappointed with this winning. I mean, there's the whole kind of like the, you know, he was the only white guy and all that sort of stuff. And I did watch the ceremony, which was interesting. But that aside, I know that's sort of major context. But that aside, looking at the book itself, I mean, it's a difficult one. Because when I think of Booker Prize winners, particularly from last decade, you know, I think about Milkman, Brief History of 7 Killings, The Sellout, and even Girl, Woman, Other. You know, I think of books which are which take risks and take and really sort of push the boat out, kind of in a literary way, in terms of the way that they're told and the structure and the form and everything. And I think that's kind of one of the criticisms of the Booker Prize, is that people say, oh, it's a very pretentious prize, and you know, it's books which are you know, really difficult to read, and you know, it's very snobby. And looking at those books, I mean, yes, I mean, those books like Milkman and Brief History, you know, all those sort of books, they're not readily accessible books, but they, you know, they're innovative, and they want to kind of like, you know, push the boundaries of form and language. And this one, and so yeah, so the people who were disappointed said that, well, this is kind of more commercial, and with this winning and then the Testaments winning last year as well, this is kind of like a sign of where the Booker is going, into kind of more commercial territory. And the people who were kind of responding to that said, well, no, this is not a commercial, it's become commercial, but it's not an inherently commercial book in of itself, because, you know, it was rejected by 30 publishers. When it was first published, it didn't do very well. It was only when it was longlisted that really became this huge success. I mean, now it's sold, I think, 500,000 copies worldwide, and it's kind of like this massive deal now that it's won. So yeah, so they're saying no, it's not a commercial book. It's I mean, out of the 6, I mean, it's definitely the most commercial of those 6, but I would say it's more conventional than the others. I'd say it's more recognizable. Like you can sort of work out what's going on plot wise. It's not too. I mean, there's Scottish dialect and all this sort of stuff, but it's not like a difficult read. The content is difficult, but the style and the form and stuff is not difficult. And then there's the so so in that case, there's the argument: does that matter? Does the fact that it's more narratively, stylistically accessible make it less of a worthy winner? Well, no, of course it doesn't. But it's just interesting, considering sort of past winners, that the judges this year, they responded to this book's emotional impact and its kind of themes and stuff over the other books, which again had a kind of emotional impact, but were doing more interesting stuff, in my opinion, structurally and in the writing itself. So yeah, I don't really have any strong opinions about this winning. I can sort of understand why it won. Maybe if I had been following the prize and had read them all before the winner was announced, maybe I would have had the same kind of big disappointment that some of the other people like Kieran and Matthew Sharappa and people did, and What Camel Reads. But now that there's distance from it, I can sort of see why this won, and I can sort of have an appreciation for this winning. It is as the author says, a queer novel, and it's the second Scottish novel to win. So if you're worried about that sort of stuff, then that sort of that ticks boxes. But yes, but no, it certainly is one of the most conventional books. Although it has very emotional. The themes and the emotions behind it are big. Lastly, the last thing I want to say about this book is that I'm getting a bit wary now. When people say, oh, it's really bleak, but it's full of warmth, I'm getting a bit wary of people saying that, because people say, the author says that this is a book about love. This is a love story between a son and his mother. And I'm like, well, sort of, but not really. No, this is about trauma. The eggs and flour of the cake that is Shuggie Bain is trauma, and the chocolate chips or the almonds scattered within the cake are the bits of love and warmth, in my opinion. Okay, and last off, a bit of an impulse one, but I read, because I started to try and read Wives and Flipping Daughters, but that didn't work, and I only had like a couple of days before the end of the month, so I decided to read The Pursuit of Love by Nancy Mitford. So this is a cast-off of my my mother's book club, and yeah, it's a very short book, and yeah, she lent it to me, and I was like, let's just give this a go. Now this, the BBC have made the BBC have adapted this recently with Lily James, and yeah, big BBC adaptation of it, which I will watch. I haven't watched yet, but I shall watch after reading this. So yes, it's about Linda, who grows up in this aristocratic family between the world wars, and yes, and she wants to fall in love, and she wants to have this big sort of romance in her life. However, she doesn't realise, but her sort of ideal of love and romance is a kind of very idealised version. It's not kind of based in reality, and so she enters these sort of string of relationships, but each kind of fails because she has a, what's the word? Yeah, she has a romanticized ideal of what she wants that love affair to be like, and the men aren't actually who she thinks they are. So yeah, it's an interesting book. This I did like it. I did enjoy it. It's kind of witty, and there are some very funny characters in it, particularly like the bohemian neighbour and the narrator, Fanny, is so she's the narrator, first person narrator, which I thought was interesting because you think the book is going to be about her, but then it's not. It's about Linda. So yeah, so she's the narrator, and she kind of describes everyone, and it's kind of like a weird. Yeah, it's kind of like the last time that you can have families in these sort of big manor houses in the States. It's like this kind of the end of that era, going into the Second World War. So yeah, one thing I did find interesting is that so Linda's first husband, I think, comes from Germany, and there's an interesting kind of look at the sort of the build up to the Second World War and the rise in fascism and kind of and how attitudes towards that in England. Yeah, I just thought that was interesting, kind of historically and politically. And then yeah, and then she sort of goes complete opposite way, and she falls in love with this communist. And yes, it's just it's a really it's a great book. I really liked it. As I say, it's very funny. There's one guy. What's his name? So there's one guy, Davy, who's like obsessed with what he eats and stuff, and who's very funny. I'm sort of interested to see. I mean, I've sort of seen trailers and stuff about the with the adaptation, and I'm not really sure Lily James would be what I imagined as Linda, but look at her, she's great, isn't she? Hello. So yes, the ending is a bit is quite. The last page is like, oh, okay, whoops. No, I liked it. I liked it a lot. I might have a go at some more Nancy Mitford because I thought this was rather funny. Really rather funny. Bear with me. So thank you for watching. If you've been watching, this is what I read in May. Look, ooh, dun 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 dun. It's fairly eclectic, isn't it? Yes. So next time you see me, I hope that this will be cut off because I'm fed up with it now. But you never know with me. So yes, I hope. Oh, what's going on? So yes, I hope everyone is okay. And yes, I shall see you very soon. Bye bye.